What's up, guys? Welcome into another episode of the Wolverine Live Recruiting Show. I'm your host, EJ Holland. Today, we're going to be talking about everything Michigan recruiting and transfer portal. So make sure to get your questions in. Before we do that, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel for free, get notifications every time we drop new videos. And also, if you're not a member of the Wolverine.com, you can subscribe today. We have a special promo code just for you, our YouTube viewers, and that promo code is UM1. That's $1 for 2 months over at the Wolverine.com. That gets you exclusive insider information on everything recruiting, transfer portal, the team, basketball, and so much more. We have more than 8,000 unique individual users, great message board community. So come over, join us over at the Wolverine.com. Again, that promo code was UM1, $1 for 2 months. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions. Remember, the questions are answered in the order that they come in. If you do want to skip the line, we do offer an opportunity to hit that super chat button. That's the box with the dollar sign. That money goes directly to our travel budget so we can continue to see top recruits around the country. But let's go ahead and dive into the questions. First person here was Tyson Smith, and he said, are we getting Haywood now that he left Bama? So yes, 5-star offensive tackle Ty Haywood is back on the open market, recently decommitted from Alabama, actually decommitted yesterday, but he kind of hasn't been a part of Alabama's class for a little while. It seemed like both parties just parted ways back around December, close to signing day. Obviously, Haywood opted not to sign with the Crimson Tide during the early signing period in December. So Michigan's been really working on this since probably late October, early November. I went out to see Ty Haywood during the Thanksgiving holiday, went back to Dallas to see family, and also went out to Ty Haywood's game. And just talking to him and talking to sources, I went ahead and I put in a prediction shortly after my visit to see him. So where do I kind of stand with that prediction? I still feel good about Michigan's chances. Like I said, Alabama is now out of the picture. He's officially decommitted. It didn't seem like Alabama wanted to really play the NIL game with him. And Michigan does. The Wolverines have completely revamped their NIL approach on the recruiting trail. It worked with Bryce Underwood, and it appears that some of the people that worked on the Underwood deal are also involved with Ty Haywood. So I have confidence that Michigan will spend enough to get Ty Haywood on board. Now, there are some other suitors. Florida State is still very much in the mix. They sent their staff to visit Haywood last week and had him on campus for an official visit. Texas Tech is still in the mix. They've been one of the newer NIL schools. They've been big spenders. They have one of the top transfer portal classes in the country. But I've been told that Texas Tech still hasn't put an adequate offer on the table. They are still very much involved in this recruitment. They are still very much a school to watch when it comes to Ty Haywood, but I think they still need to step up their NIL game to be on par with Michigan. Now, Michigan's entire staff went out to see, or entire offensive staff went out to see Ty Haywood last week in the Dallas area. And along with the staff, along with Sherrone Moore and Grant Newsome, the usual suspects, was general manager Sean McGee. And when Sean McGee hits the recruiting trail, you know that Michigan means business with NIL. That's what he's there for, right? It's not like Sean McGee's the relationship builder. He's the NIL guy. He's been in charge, or, has been a big factor in Michigan revolutionizing and evolving its NIL approach. So having McGee out there, I think you all know what it meant. And that is that Michigan is continuing to pitch NIL, continuing to put competitive offers in front of Ty Haywood. And I think that will continue this weekend, which is absolutely crucial. Haywood is making his official visit to Michigan, and I think the Wolverines have a good shot to close. Now, Haywood's not expected to make his decision until the late signing period, which is, first week of February. But I could see Michigan maybe closing before that if they put a really significant NIL offer on the table that, satisfies Haywood and everybody around him. Again, McGee will be key with that. And I think meetings this weekend will be super key. Of course, Haywood has to get familiar with the program. He's never been to Ann Arbor. So this official visit will be his first look at the program, from the football aspect, the facilities, the strength and conditioning program. He'll get to see film with Grant Newsome and Sherrone more. He'll get to learn a little bit more about Michigan's track record of developing offensive linemen. He'll get to know a little bit more about the school. He'll get a feel for the environment around Ann Arbor, especially in the winter, being a Texas guy. So things like that, will be somewhat important. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to NIL. And can Michigan beat out Texas Tech? Can they beat out Florida State? Right now, I say yes, but we do have a couple of weeks to go, and we'll see how this weekend goes. But as of today, I still feel very optimistic in my prediction for Michigan. All right, let's go down to Tyson Smith again. And he says, are we getting the transfer tackle, Shiaz Pete? So Shiaz Pete, portal offensive tackle. Michigan still has a need at that position. Look, the Wolverines landed 2 offensive linemen. You have Lawrence Hattar, who's more of a pure mauling guard. He's going to be in competition for a starting spot on the interior of the offensive line. Then you have Brady Norton, who committed coming up from the FCS level, who's kind of a younger guy, still has multiple years of eligibility, might need a year before he's ready to start, but could get in the rotation this year. So, again, still a need for a tackle. And Shiaz Pete can be that guy. He's an experienced player. He has 1 year of eligibility remaining. He's a mountain of a man at 6'8", 287 pounds. And according to our transfer portal insider, Pete Nakos, this one appears to be coming down to Nebraska and Michigan, which is really interesting because there hasn't been a ton of Michigan buzz. He hasn't made a visit to Michigan. I think that will probably come after this brief dead period comes to an end. Remember, we are in a dead period. It is a brief one. It started Monday and it ends on Thursday. So starting on Thursday, transfer portal players can once again make visits to schools. Now, Nebraska does still have a need at tackle. They did fill it a bit by landing Alabama's Elijah Pritchett, but I am told that Nebraska still wants Pete. The good thing for Michigan is Pete went out to Nebraska and didn't commit. He's already been on a visit there. So Michigan would have the upper hand of having a visit after Nebraska. And then on top of that, like I said, there's a true need at tackle. Michigan hasn't really addressed that like Nebraska did with Pritchett. Pritchett's being recruited to come in and play right away. And while Brady Norton is a tackle, again, he's a guy that's probably going to need a year. So Pete would be the guy at Michigan. Now, there are some other interesting potential suitors in this recruitment. Stanford's been in the mix. Kentucky has already hosted him for a visit and has obviously been willing to spend in the portal. You have Vanderbilt, where he has some ties to. Vanderbilt actually was considered the early leader, so maybe they come back around as a prominent player. I think Shiaz Pete's portal recruitment has been very fascinating because he's played things so close to the vest. So I think a lot of his recruitment has really been speculation. Michigan did offer. They've been trying hard. They have that need. Grant Newsome's been in contact. Sherrone Moore's been in contact. They are pushing hard here. So we'll see if he does pop up in Ann Arbor after the dead period. Right now, again, it's kind of hard to get a true feel for this really kind of interesting, quiet portal recruitment. But it is an important one for Michigan. Not a lot of tackles left out there. Tyson Smith says, are you rooting for Ohio State or Notre Dame? Obviously, those two teams are playing in the national championship next week. I'm not rooting for either. Obviously, I hate Notre Dame, so I would rather see Notre Dame lose than Ohio State because Imagine if Notre Dame wins, man, how bad my mentions would be on Twitter. I would have to like mute my notifications for a little while there. And I don't want to deal with those weirdos in South Bend. So I'd rather Notre Dame lose. You have to remember, I'm not a Michigan fan, so I don't have the same hatred or natural born hatred of Ohio State that most of you guys do. I have more hatred towards Notre Dame for sure. Not that I would want to see Ohio State win either, but I think it would be better in a sense because not just because I hate Notre Dame, but also Michigan beat Ohio State to end the regular season. You can still talk trash to Ohio State fans. You can still say, well, we beat you guys. So, and we've beaten you guys for multiple years in a row. So yeah, you got the natty, but you weren't able to beat the defending national champions. So I think Ohio State would also have kind of a weird feeling like, yeah, you won the natty, but you still lost to Michigan. So I think there's an angle there that you can play with Notre Dame. Just, screw them. They suck. David says, if Michigan can land Rider Lions, will that impact the decision of 2027 guys like Keegan Croucher, who Michigan also likes? Yeah, I think it's kind of early to be thinking about 2027s. Obviously, Rider Lions has risen to the top of Michigan's board this cycle. For those of you that don't know, he is an LDS kid. He will be going on a mission. So that means he's technically a 2027 recruit. In this hypothetical, if Michigan lands Rider Lions, then yeah, I think, 2027 quarterbacks might be a little more hesitant to jump on board. Chip Lindsey is still setting his 2027 board. So they offered Keegan Croucher before Lindsey came on board. So it'll be interesting to see if, Lindsey likes him as much as Kirk Campbell did. It seems like they really like Trey Taylor for 2027 as well, but he could be impacted by a Rider Lions commitment. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But I mean, I think the good news for Michigan fans is the bigger thing is landing Rider Lions, and who cares about the rest, really? I mean, not saying that Trey Taylor or anybody like that is a bad player, but you have a potential 5-star with enough separation between Bryce Underwood to where Underwood won't really impact Lions' decision, and you want Rider Lions. I think he's a sure bet 5-star guy right now, and assuming he comes back from the mission and is still the same guy, then, it really doesn't matter what other 2027 quarterbacks think because you have Rider Lions. But like I said, I think there's enough of a gap there where Underwood, signing won't really affect Lions because in this hypothetical, Underwood would be a junior by the time Lions enrolls, and then Lions would probably need a little bit of time to get his rhythm back coming off the mission. And then Bryce is off to the NFL if he does everything he's supposed to do and is out of here in 3 years. And then you can transition to Rider Lions. So, yeah, I mean, I think that would be the dream scenario for Michigan. Obviously, Chip Lindsey was out in California recruiting Rider Lions this past week. And now the two sides are in talks for a spring visit. So I still think winning over Rider Lions is going to be a little difficult. I think Oregon's definitely a school to watch. BYU with his faith, USC where his brother currently plays. So right now, I would say it's probably a little more likely that Michigan gets a developmental guy for 26 and lands a guy like Trey Taylor in 2027. But if you get Rider Lions, I don't think it really matters who you get for 26 or what happens with the other 27 quarterbacks. He's a very, very talented player. Jackson Ross says, do you know if Michigan will kick the tires with Harrison Wallace or any other portal wide receivers? I think they should probably take a look at Wallace and maybe just see what pops up. Maybe they circle back to Skylar Bell during the spring transfer portal. Skylar Bell was very close to committing to Michigan, and it probably would have gotten done if they wouldn't have ran into those credit hurdles. Now, Skylar Bell will graduate in the spring. So once the spring portal opens, maybe they circle back to him. I would think that circling back to Skylar Bell in the spring would probably be more realistic than landing somebody from the portal right now. Though I do think they'll probably kick the tires with Wallace and at least just gauge his interest. But I still think right now the most likely option is probably circling back to Bell in the spring and maybe seeing who else enters the portal in the spring. Not a lot of wide receiver options left. But yeah, I mean, if any other, I guess contributors at the wide receiver position jump into the portal from the remaining, playoff teams or the playoff teams that lose, then I think you have to take a look if you're Michigan. I mean, I think Anthony Simpson is a good land as a slot. He missed all of that this past year. He's only had one real, campaign where he's actually produced. Donovan McCulley, same thing, missed all of this past year. I still think you need more of a difference maker. I still think this wide receiver room needs help. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely look at any other portal receivers that jump in and circle back to Bell in the spring. Andrew Malek says, should we be concerned with any specific recruits after the Wink Martindale interviews? Any specific names? The guy he was the most involved with in 2025 was Nathaniel Wusu-Boateng, who's already enrolled. And, as much as it would suck for Wu to probably lose Martindale if that happens, I mean, I don't see him jumping into the portal right away or anything like that. As far as 2026 recruits, it's still early in the cycle. And you have to remember that Wink wasn't super active on the recruiting trail, especially with underclassmen. So I don't think it would really have a big impact with recruiting, to be completely honest. And that's not a diss on Wink. I think, he did a lot of good work with recruits when they came to campus for visits. I think his resume really spoke for itself. I think he did a phenomenal job of breaking down film for recruits on visits and really getting into the nitty gritty of where they would fit into his scheme. I think he was a very valuable tool there. But at the same time, like I said, he wasn't a guy that was necessarily a relationship builder, and a lot of these 26s don't really have that with him. So I don't think it'll, be a big loss from a recruiting standpoint. Obviously, from a team standpoint, that's different. But if you're asking me from a recruiting standpoint, I just don't see it really impacting, many of any recruits. Jake Nowitzki says, does getting Haywood impact our chances with Jackson Cantwell? I don't think so, because I do think that if Ty Haywood sticks at tackle, he'll be a right tackle. But I personally think that Ty Haywood, at least early on in his career, will probably slide inside to guard. I think you could see an offensive line in the near future of Babalola, Ty Haywood, whoever wins the center job, Jake Winera, or, transfer somebody else, Blake Frazier and Andrew Sprague. I think that would be a terrific offensive line, that's, again, very possible, a year from now. So I don't think it would really impact Cantwell, because Cantwell is more of a true tackle. I think in that scenario, if that line shakes out like that, then you could pitch him as the, future replacement for Andrew Sprague. So I'm not sure it would have too much of an effect, in terms of how Cantwell looks at the future of the line. He's also the number one player in the country, so I don't think he'd be afraid to really come in and compete. I do think it could affect Michigan's willingness to spend on Jackson Cantwell. How much money do you really have to spend if you're excited about that future line a year from now? If you already have Babalola on board, if you already have Ty Haywood, who can start inside and kick out to right tackle later on, does it matter? Do you need to spend millions of dollars on a guy like Jackson Cantwell? I'm not too sure. I think you can use that money for other positions. So I think in that sense, it could have an impact, as opposed to Cantwell looking at Haywood committing. Let's go ahead and go down to Gino Rimo, I guess it's not a question. He just says the change in NIL philosophy is interesting. That's why Michigan is bargain bin shopping for portal options with only 1 year of eligibility. You also have to keep in mind that they've had issues with credit restrictions. I mean, they would have gotten Skylar Bell and they ran into credit restrictions. They've talked to some other guys that also had some credit restrictions. So I think that kind of plays a role. And I also think you have to remember that Michigan's just not, splurging with cash. They are running that NFL style model that Sean McGee is bringing. So they're trying to spend money they do have wisely. I mean, they obviously spent big with Bryce Underwood. They're obviously willing to spend big with Ty Haywood. They spent big with Damon Payne. They spent big with Justice Haynes. They're just trying to kind of manage that money in a different way. Andrew Younger says, any rumblings on our chances with either of the Penn State receivers that just entered the portal? Yeah, I mean, obviously they just entered. Like I said, I think Michigan would be smart to kick the tires with any potential contributor at that position. But we will probably hear more in the next, 24, 48 hours as far as, interest level there. Sergio Duffy says, am I the only one feeling let down with the Bryce Underwood gravitational effect? That's a tough one. Yes, you have Bryce Underwood committed at quarterback, but it's still a tough sell to wide receivers because you're pitching them on hope. Now, receivers have taken notice. Like, I talked to Travis Johnson the other day, who's, at the very top of the wide receiver board for Michigan. And he told me Bryce Underwood's signing is something that, makes Michigan a more appealing option. I think these transfer portal guys, if you're Michigan, you're likely recruiting a 1-year guy again because you have those credit restrictions. And they, may not be overly excited about a true freshman, on top of the fact that they're not guaranteed to have Underwood as the starter because, you brought in Mikey Keene. So it might not really have too big of an impact on portal guys. It probably hasn't, which is why we haven't, seen the portal guys really mention Underwood or, just hop on board at will at Michigan. And, with the high school guys, I do think it'll make a positive impact for 26. But I think a lot of these high school guys also want to see what the offense looks like. What does it look like under Chip Lindsey? Is Michigan actually going to be more balanced? Are they going to throw the ball a little bit more? Is it going to be the same ground and pound scheme? What does Bryce Underwood look like as a true freshman? So I think you're selling hope, and it's great hope because you can't sell anything better than a 5-star number 1 player in the country. And I also think you have to keep in mind as well, and this isn't really a knock on Bryce. I mean, everybody's different, right? So with Bryce, I think he was a little quieter. He definitely had the high profile of being the number 1 overall prospect in the country. But I think when you look at a guy like JJ, I think you saw a positive effect with JJ from a recruiting standpoint because he had such a magnetic personality. He was so active in recruiting. He was committed to Michigan for a long time, for more than a year. So he was out there, recruiting for the Wolverines every single day. He would go out to 7-on-7 tournaments and camps and all these big events. And he would constantly be in everybody's ear about Michigan. And with Bryce, on top of being a little more quiet than JJ, didn't have the luxury of ever recruiting for Michigan because he committed so late in the cycle and now he's already on campus. So he's not proactively involved in a lot of these guys' recruiting process like JJ was. And JJ wasn't just recruiting for his class, he was recruiting for the next class. And again, Bryce didn't really have that chance being such a late commit. All right, let's go down to your average fan. Michigan struggling to get D1 offensive linemen, can't get good receivers. Do they expect Bryce to play all positions or something? I mean, the portal haul is still good. I wouldn't say it gets an A, but I think they did fill some positions of need, with the exception of receiver. I still would have liked to have seen a more game-changing guy at that position. And I still would like to see them land Shayaz Pete or another offensive tackle, but again, kind of slim pickings there. Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to have to spend in the spring portal if some good options come up, maybe some late options come up here with playoff teams losing, or spend big, on true freshmen. I think if you're Michigan, you have to put together a hellacious package in terms of NIL for Tristan Keys. I think that's the guy you target and you say, you're Bryce Underwood's future wide receiver. Here's a big NIL offer. I think you give a somewhat big NIL offer to a guy like Travis Johnson, who's another big body. And I think you give a similar package to somebody else that's a speedy receiver, because Michigan doesn't really have any guys in the room that run sub 11 100 meters, which is concerning. So I think, you're going to have to spend big with NIL with high school wide receivers since you missed out in the portal, and if you do, especially if you can't convince anybody in the spring. And even if you do get guys out of the portal in the spring, they're more than likely 1 year guys. So for the future, you need to spend big on high school wide receivers. In terms of the offensive line, they're obviously spending big on the high school side. They got Babalola, they got Ty Haywood. For the future, I don't have as much concern with the offensive line. Like I said, an offensive line of Babalola, Haywood, a center, which is whether it's Winera or transfer, Blake Frazier and Andrew Sprague, I think is still very exciting. Michelle Wallace says, "Why do you recruit for the Michigan Wolverines if you're not a fan?" I cover recruiting for Michigan because, well, it's my job, but also, you're not supposed to really be a fan. I know some beat reporters are, like Blue Sam, but you're not. I mean, why would you want to get your news from a fan? Then you're not really getting an unbiased perspective. You're just getting regurgitated information that's given to you from inside the building, which nobody wants just a bunch of sunshine, right? You want to know what's really going on. So for me, the way I approach it is I give you the good and I give you the bad as well, because that's what you want. For example, I grew up a fan of the San Francisco 49ers. If I go and get news on the 49ers, I don't want a fan giving it to me. Like, why would I want a fan giving me 49ers news? I want an actual reporter giving me news. If you want a fan giving you news, you might as well, listen to Enley Wu or David or your average fan or many other commenters here. Why would you want a fan giving you news? That's never really made sense for me. And in terms of why I cover Michigan, I'm just from Texas, so I don't have any affiliation, but Michigan's always been a program that I've really respected. It's a job I looked into even when I was younger. The fan base is very large, great. It's one of the blue bloods. It's one of the winningest programs of all time. So, it is the winningest program of all time. That's why I cover Michigan, and have enjoyed their recruiting. Obviously, was close to guys like JJ and Junior and Donovan, and I like the type of kid that Michigan recruits. Enley Wu says, "How are we doing with Zahir Mathis and Ty Haywood?" Like I said, I still like my pick for Haywood right now going into the OV. With Zahir, I think it's still kind of up in the air. Right now, Florida State, UCLA, Michigan seem to be leading the pack. Maryland's gotten involved as well here recently. So still a little too early to call for Mathis, not really leaning one way or the other. Obviously Michigan right now is scheduled to get the last visit, which is great. The Wolverines can sell edge production. Maybe, we got that question earlier. Who does Martindale's departure, if that happens, who does that impact? Maybe Zahir Mathis, because he's going to be going into his official visit not knowing, what the defensive coordinator situation is going to be. So if any recruit is impacted by Wink potentially leaving, it could be Mathis. But I think Michigan has a really good shot here. Again, the edge production, the getting that last visit, I think helps out a lot. So, we'll see how this one shakes out, but still too early to call. David says, "Is Michigan still in touch with Jake Kreul? I want him in the class badly." Yeah, I like Jake a lot. Jake visited in the summer and hasn't been back. So I think for Michigan to really have a shot with Jake. They need to get him back on campus this offseason. He's really blown up in the rankings. He's an industry top 60 overall prospect. I named Jake as one of the best 10 Michigan recruits that I saw on the road this fall. If you read my scouting reports, you know that I'm obsessed with tall, long edge players. I do not like short edges. I do not like a lack of length at the position. I'm not a fan of that at all. And it's just my personal preference. I like the tall, long edges, the tall, long athletic edges. Jake is an exception. I don't care that he's not tall. I don't care that he has shorter arms for the position. He is so good, man. His technique, his power, his pad level, just his ability off the edge, I mean, was kind of unmatched this year. Like I said, I named him one of the top 10 players I saw on the road. He is fantastic. He's an IMG kid, so he knows guys like Boateng and Strayhorn and Donovan Johnson. So, yeah, I mean, I think Michigan is definitely still in contact, but they have to get him back on campus because his recruitment has really exploded. We are past the 30-minute mark, guys, so time to remind you guys to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel for free. If you want to contribute to my travel budget, you can hit that little dollar symbol in the box. That's a super chat. We'll answer your question right away. And also, if you're not a subscriber to thewolverine.com, you can subscribe today using that promo code UM1. That's $1 for 2 months over at thewolverine.com. Get the latest recruiting intel, transfer portal, team coverage, basketball, so much more over at thewolverine.com. It looks like we have more than 240 people watching live right now, so we should have 240 likes. It doesn't cost you anything to like the video or to subscribe. Get notifications every time we drop new videos. All right, we are over the 30-minute mark, so let's go rapid fire. I'm not sure what C. Faust is asking. He says, what about Clinkscale or Elston? They're for the DC job. That'd be interesting. A reunion. Obviously, both were candidates. I don't know if there's hurt feelings. Both were talked about last offseason and obviously didn't get the job. And, they're in the NFL now. So I think it might be tough to pull them. And again, there could be some hurt feelings there. They might like the NFL. C. Foss says, do you think Moore was not already aware of this possibility? With Wink, probably. I mean, you kind of knew you were running that risk when you hired him. Let's go down to JSL. He says confidence level on Haywood. I'm going with just the standard, whenever you put in your prediction, the 60%. And that might seem a little bit low, but I'm going with that just because it's an NIL recruitment. I mean, anything could change. You could see Texas Tech say, you know what, we're tired of not having an adequate offer. We're going to go crazy and spend this amount of money on Ty Haywood, or you could see somebody come in late with a super NIL offer. But, pretty smooth sailing for Michigan heading into the OV. I like, the Wolverines' chances. John A. Schultz says, EJ, seeing as you are also the portal expert now, yes, against my will, do you think Michigan has done enough to upgrade the wide receiver corps with the 25 wide receivers and the portal wide receivers? They've definitely boosted the room. I like the size that they're bringing in with Jamar Browder and Jacob Washington, but I think they'll probably need a little bit of time to develop. I think Andrew Marsh is a really, really good football player who can make an impact from day one, but doesn't really have that game-changing speed that you would look for in a guy that isn't necessarily a bigger body. I think that Simpson out of the portal can do some positive things out of the slot. I think McCauley can be productive as a bigger bodied guy, but they're still lacking that pizzazz, that, like I said, the big time receiver. I mean, I'd love to see them bring somebody else in as well. Butter XO says, who are the quarterbacks on the board in 2026? So Chip Lindsey is still resetting that board. Obviously, Ryder Lyons is at the top of that list, but as we discussed earlier, he's technically a 2027 because he's an LDS kid. So they haven't officially sent out any offers for 26 quarterbacks. I can tell you that Lindsey was out in California last week. He saw Oscar Rios an on 300 quarterback who was actually committed to Purdue. He's blown up in the rankings. He's definitely a guy to keep an eye on. They have kicked the tires again with Brady Smigel, who is a top 100 quarterback committed to Florida State. He's definitely one to watch. If you remember, Smigel visited Michigan and was supposed to get back to Michigan right before Brady Hart committed. Obviously, Brady Hart reclassed and is now going to Texas A&M. But Michigan was heavily involved with Smigel. There are a few others out there. There's Brody McWhorter out of Georgia, Logan Rogers out of Florida. I had a video that you can see here on our YouTube channel that talked about some guys on Michigan's board in 2026, but Lindsey is doing his due diligence. He's traveling around the country this month and making his in-person evaluations. EJ, this is from John A. Scholl. He says, EJ is a non-year understudy, and will the Wolverine be hiring him to help you with recruiting? No, I really don't know who the Anon account belongs to. I have no idea. So I promise you it's not my burner. I don't have any burners. And I definitely wouldn't spell like that. So I'm not sure who the Anon account belongs to. Big House Boy says, will Michigan go after Harrison Wallace? We talked about that earlier. I would kick the tires, but we still have to wait and see. We do have a super chat from Sean O'Hara, and his is $4.99, but he doesn't have a question. So Sean, make sure to follow that up with a question. It is not popping up for us. Let's go back up to Moose. He says, struggling to get D1O line. You can't be serious. Well, we're in that spot right now, I guess. Like I said, I think the future of I think Moose might have been making fun of the other guy who was asking the question, but like I said, I think the future of the offensive line is fine. I mean, you have Babalola, you potentially have Haywood, you have Brady Norton too, who I didn't even mention. I mean, he has multiple years of eligibility left. But you have Blake Frazier, you have Andrew Sprague. I think the future is bright, even though this year's line might still have some concerns. Let's go ahead and go down to C. Foss. He says, what is the punter status? They're looking at a few punters, but nothing super significant to really throw out right now. Moose says we do still need a top wide receiver. Obviously, I agree. And last question is our super chat from Sean O'Hara. And he says, hey, EJ, just joining now. Is Ty Haywood really visiting this weekend? Chances? Yes. Ty Haywood is visiting this weekend. I still feel pretty good about Michigan's chances. I have no reason to change my prediction going into the weekend. I feel like Michigan has had some really positive NIL discussions, and I think the offer that they'll put on the table will exceed the competition. Now, competition can always counter that, so nothing's ever guaranteed in recruiting, but I do like the way this one is trending for Michigan. All right, guys, I appreciate y'all for joining me tonight. Make sure to tune in next week. Like I said, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel for free.